Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to SCVO's webinar on public procurement and the voluntary sector. My name's Alan Young. I'm a Policy and Public Affairs Officer with SCVO, that's the Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations, and I'll be hosting this hour's meeting. Joining me are an expert panel drawn from Scottish Government, Scotland Excel, and the WISE Group, to help us explore the world of public procurement and the voluntary sector. I would like to thank everybody who has signed up to attend today's meeting. From the list of people registered, it's quite a diverse range of different voluntary sector organisations and public sector bodies. I very much look forward to reading your questions later on and hearing your insights. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. Now, this is a Zoom webinar, which I'm sure some of you will have used before, but for those of you who this is your first time at a Zoom webinar, there's just a couple of points to note. First of all, only myself and the panelists will be visible on screen. And the second point is that in order to put forward your questions, you're asked to use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. And there's also a chat function as well for your comments. Okay, so the main purpose of this webinar today is to get into detail about the public procurement and the voluntary sector's experience of it. We hope that there will be this event will enhance our collective understanding of public procurement from the voluntary sector's perspective, and we hope it will be a springboard for more collective action. At SCVO in particular, we're very interested in the experiences of both our members and other voluntary sector organisations. And afterwards, after the meeting, we'd be very keen to hear in more detail from you, your experiences of public procurement. I should also mention that the Scottish Government has currently commissioned Blake Stevenson to do a piece of research into voluntary sector experiences of public procurement in Scotland. And we will have a link to a survey which they are running, which closes on December 21st. I'll put that in the chat function a little later on, and I'll also send it out when I send out a write-up of today's meeting and the audio recording of this meeting. I should also note that this meeting is being recorded, and it will possibly be uploaded to the SCVO YouTube channel as well. So we will hear from 3 speakers today before we move on to our Q&A session. Now, our first speaker is Nick Ford, who's the Director of Procurement and the Housing Directorate at the Scottish Government. And Nick's going to touch on some of the work which the government is doing with others to leverage over £13 billion of public procurement spend to create a green and lasting economic recovery. So I'm just going to hand over to Nick. Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I thought you guys were unmuting. That's all right. I wasn't listening correctly. Thanks, Alan. Good afternoon, everyone. Really good to be here. And thank you very much, SCVO, for hosting this webinar and providing what is a great opportunity for me to share a few thoughts on public procurement, which I certainly can't do justice in the 5 minutes I think I've got scheduled, but hopefully the rich conversation afterwards will help. So we obviously, Alan mentioned 13.3 billion. We want to use that 13.3 billion public procurement spend to create a really vibrant, dynamic, innovative supply base, particular supply base in Scotland, that really grows jobs, benefits local communities, and delivers on our ambitions around climate obligations. And the third sector, when I often talk about suppliers, supply base, SMEs, the third sector is absolutely integral into that. I think Collectively, the results that we're delivering already and the outcomes that we're delivering are quite impressive. We're yielding out of that 13 billion, we're yielding around 11 billion of economic impact, around 6 billion to Scottish GDP, and over 110,000 jobs. Procurement, I think, within that has made massive advancements, particularly over recent years. Really now it is, I think, very much recognised as a key enabler, particularly a key enabler in the fundamental areas of being able to drive the climate changes that we need to, and socio-economic growth. Public procurement, so if I just take each of those, public procurement really contributes and must contribute to the transition to a more resource efficient and low carbon economy. It was fantastic to see the First Minister address the Global Assembly at COP26 in Glasgow, and obviously talk about where she talked about putting people at the heart of the climate action. And certainly, you know, the Citizens Assembly in this area, which has got a number of procurement recommendations as well, lends itself to that. And the programme for government, this year's programme for government, really commits us to influencing and empowering buyers, suppliers and others to use public sector procurement to support a green recovery. We're working really collectively across Scottish public sector to drive a comprehensive and I actually think quite an impressive programme of climate activity and action. We launched earlier this year a very, what I think is a really good detailed e-literacy programme, which is available to everyone. I'd like to hope many of you on this call have undertaken that programme. If you haven't, please do so. Whilst it's probably slightly, well, it is aligned to buyers and procurement professionals, I think it's a brilliant e-literacy programme for anyone, because it helps to build awareness and understanding of the climate challenge. I'm also pleased to say it's been shortlisted for Scottish Public Service Award. If I now move on from climate to the enabler public procurement provides that socio-economic recovery. In addition, I think to the strong results I mentioned before, what I didn't mention is the community benefits that we deliver through procurement, all the support that we deliver to Scottish organisations, local supply chains, SMEs. Over 7 billion of that 13 billion goes to Scottish organisations, and over 46% of it goes to SMEs. So I think our work in Scottish procurement is certainly internationally recognised for being innovative and progressive. But having said that, I want us to stay at the forefront, very much stay at the forefront and be leading the pack on public procurement. We issued earlier this year a set of public procurement priorities, again available on our website, and I'd like to hope you may have time to have a look at those. And they really set out the key areas that we want to focus on and take forward over the coming years in public procurement. And to support this real ethos I think we've got in Scottish public procurement around continuous improvement, we have a real focus on gathering and analysing evidence of what works and certainly what doesn't work, as well as listening to our suppliers and stakeholders. So I'm really pleased to see Alan mentioning before some further research in this area. We do it through a myriad of ways. Our own independent research, we published some of that earlier this year into Sustainable Procurement Duty. Supplier surveys, again, we published findings from a supplier survey we did earlier this year. I host a number of SME roundtables. I hosted one of those just last week, actually, which includes third sector organisations. And we look at the annual procurement reports. Again, a real strength of Scottish public procurement that fundamentally nearly every buying organisation produces an annual procurement report as well as an annual procurement strategy, and we look at those and see what's working, and again looking at opportunities going forward. And of course events like this, which are brilliant, and I hope as we come on, you know, the opportunity it provides for me to listen to experiences of public procurement. We take all that, we analyse all that, and I believe where we can and where we do identify quick wins, we take action as soon as we can. Whether that's some of the recent areas we've been focusing on around prompt payment, obviously some of the activities and guidance that we issued through the COVID pandemic, or whether it's more recently, which I was super pleased about, was our recent announcement on making the real living wage a condition in Scottish Government contracts. So where we can make some quick wins, we certainly do. Where some of this is longer term transformation, I think building skills, building capability, building capacity around public procurement, that's a much longer term journey. And I think that is where our set of public procurement priorities, as well as the programme for government, lays out what we are doing in this space. And then there's always areas, as I've hopefully has come across through my pitch here, there's always areas where we need to understand more. What are the options? What are the options to help us achieve those ambitions of staying at the front of the pack and being world leading in public procurement? And that'll involve, ongoing dialogue, ongoing further research, and ongoing listening to supply base, listening to key stakeholders. And it's on this last area, that last area that I'd like to finish around. I really believe that collaboration is at the core of good procurement. I'm sure that some of you are already engaged in the work we're doing around the National Care Service going forward, and procurement plays a major part in how social care is and will be delivered going forward. Our analysis shows it's the second largest area of spend on Scottish public procurement, around 2 billion a year. And so I think we have a real opportunity through the work we're doing on the National Care Service, real opportunity to work much more collaboratively and innovatively to ensure that people get the care and the services they need to fulfil their lives. So provides a fantastic opportunity. So anyway, I think that's probably around my 5 minutes. I hope that's given you a bit of a flavour of kind of the ambition that we're driving and some of the areas. Thank you for listening. Really looking forward to hearing from Sean and Jennifer, and then the rich discussion. But back to you, Alan.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. We'll now move on to our second speaker, who's Jennifer McCarroll. She's a senior social care manager at Scotland Excel, and she's going to be talking about some of the work her organisation does to support public sector staff around about sustainability and collaborative procurement approaches. Jennifer?
Hello, thank you, Alan. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and hopefully this is smooth. Success?
Yep.
Yes, smashing. Okay, so jump in if that's a problem, but hopefully you should be able to see that. Okay. So thanks, Alan. As Alan said, my name is Jennifer McCarroll. I am the Strategic Programme Manager for Scotland Excel, and I cover our work in relation to social care. I'm thrilled to be asked to speak to you today, so thank you very much for having me. For anybody who's not familiar with Scotland Excel, we are a membership organisation, a public sector organisation. Our members are the 32 local authorities, that includes the Health and Social Care Partnerships, and we also have a number of associate members, largely housing associations, but also lots of voluntary sector organisations who utilise our contracts. And since we were established in 2008, we've been delivering collaborative contracts across a wide range of areas. So you can see in the bottom half of the screen there, that is the category areas that we cover in terms of national contracts. So we're talking about food in schools, the wheelie bins that we use, bitumen on the roads. The contracts that Scotland Excel delivers, it covers a wide range of just everyday products and services that we all utilise. In addition to those sort of very everyday kind of products that we procure through our frameworks, Scotland Excel also undertakes some very strategic commissioning and procurement activity in respect to some critical social care contracts for people, which is the area that I cover. And this is just set out a bit more detail on this page. So we cover both services across adult social care and children's services. We've got about just over 200 providers overall, and although we've got voluntary sector provision across the Scotland Excel portfolio, the vast majority of providers in the voluntary sector are working with us in social care, and particularly in children's services, where we've got just over 3/4 of the providers are voluntary sector organisations. So as Alan mentioned, I'm going to talk a wee bit about our sustainable approach to procurement and also our collaborative approach. So I've tried to summarise a couple of sort of key areas of sustainable procurement on the slide here, but in the 5 minutes we've got, we're not going to go through this and do it any justice, and there's certainly even more areas that we could potentially cover. But one part I did want to mention in particular was around about sustainable rates, because it seems like quite a topical one to discuss. So particularly, I suppose, in relation to sustainable rates, there has been a fair amount of criticism of social care commissioning and procurement activity in recent reports and things, particularly around about a kind of over focus on price, or price being the kind of determining factor for making key decisions. And what I wanted to highlight to you today is that that obviously doesn't always have to be the case, but certainly, I mean, any activity around about rates and pricing where decisions are made and price is the key determining factor to the detriment of quality, clearly that is problematic. But at Scotland Excel, for example, we don't have any of our national frameworks would preclude providers from participating based on the rates that they come forward with, nor do we have any ranked frameworks or areas like that. And in particular, our sort of fairly new care and support framework, that was based on an evaluation of the quality of the service that was offered, but also about the financial transparency rather than the cost itself. I'm now going to move on to our collaborative approach. Scotland Excel's approach to public sector procurement is a collaborative one. It has to be. We develop our strategies and all our documentation following a consultation with a wide range of stakeholders, including providers, local authority purchasers, provider representative bodies, and a wide range of other stakeholders. That collaborative activity is really important to set up the overarching frameworks, but what I think is worth pointing out is that there's lots of opportunity to have collaborative activity and innovative discussions at a local level as well. I think there is a common misconception that where there is some national activity or there's big frameworks, that would prevent, it would supersede any sort of discussions locally or prevent you from having those types of collaborative discussions. But actually, I think that good national procurement activity is a facilitator. So Nick talked about procurement being an enabler, and I think in this space, a good national solution, because it deals with the sort of key contractual elements, once it takes away that administrative burden, it can be a real facilitator to allow providers and purchasers to be having more detailed discussions about the things that really matter, the services for people, and to do that locally. I think another common misconception about framework agreements and about national pieces of work is that the framework agreements in particular is that they are limited in how people use them. But actually, we've got, I think, very flexible procurement legislation around about social care, and I think well-constructed national arrangements can allow lots of flexible options for how people would use them. A good sort of example of this, I think, is an example from the Murray Council, who used the Scotland Excel Care and Support Framework for a housing support requirement. And what the council did, rather than directly award the piece of work to a provider under the framework, is that they identified the people who were required in the service, and they asked providers to come and talk to that group of people to provide some solutions for how they might meet their needs. And that ultimately allowed that group of people themselves to determine the solution that was best for them. So they picked their own provider. And I think the examples like that, that's the kind of thing we want to see more of. And I think that we can do more to encourage, and by we, I think Scotland Excel clearly needs to do more to encourage that in particular. And I'd just like to finish on my last point there is about moving forward. So anyone listening who works in social care just now will be well aware of the sort of major changes in policy direction that are being discussed at the moment, both in the adult sector with the Feely review and the work that Nick mentioned around about the establishment of a new national care service, but equally in children's services and the commitments around about the promise. And I think those big pieces of work that are going on, they provide a real opportunity in many respects, but certainly in terms of options for like collaborative work going forward, I think they are really good opportunities. Clearly, work in relation to these pieces of work and decisions have to be made. They have to be taken collaboratively, and not just at the very strategic level, at the strategic policy making level, but right down to where individual organisations like Scotland Excel are looking at what we need to do in individual contracts on our own work plan and how how to incorporate some of the decisions that are coming forward and how to reflect the best practice and how to make sure that we are rising to the challenge ahead of us. And I think that work needs to be done collaboratively, and we need to do more to co-produce what that future and change looks like. So that was it. That was it from me, Alan. I think I might have gone over my time just slightly.
That's okay. That's great, Jennifer. Thanks very much. And now on to our third and final speaker, who's Sean Duffy. Sean is the Chief Executive of the WISE Group and is also an SCVO trustee. And Sean has considerable experience of procurement both north and south of the border, which he's going to draw on. Over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Alan. I'm going to take a kind of slightly unconventional approach to this. No slides. I think the things that I've been asked to outline my thoughts on are things that are improving already, the challenge and where next. So, I mean, I think improving already. I think the third sector has been incredible during the pandemic. They've acted quickly, and in many cases they've actually been innovative in most of the services, offering funders and government departments alternative methods of service delivery in terms of their obligations, and finding new ways of engaging citizens that's relevant to them. I think the challenge is, do our procurement professionals know what they're paying for and looking for and measuring the right things? Funding direct services is one thing, but we get back to this thing about core costs, the contribution to core costs, and how do we as organisations improve if there is no contribution to those costs that we bear every day. And where next? I think our collective opportunity is to ensure that our procurement processes consider the COVID-19 impacts. Organisations have had a torrid time, and undoubtedly will have had to change their cost models accordingly. And they're going to have to reinvest to get back to a position of sustainability and deliverability. What does that look like as we come out of this from a procurement perspective? And more generally, what's the cultural fit of those involved? So just the resourcing post-COVID. To say, the challenge, as we all know, is that procurement often largely only pays for frontline service delivery. And they don't necessarily consider, or they cap at a low level, the cost recovery related to core costs of the organisations delivering. And as I say, the pandemic is, in a WISE Group perspective, we find ourselves thrust into a competitive situation with organisations that who are much less well resourced because of the situation they found themselves in with the pandemic. At their core, and as a result, they've had to cut their way out of the crisis. So potentially coming out of this, procurement may see organisations presenting a weaker service delivery proposition because of the necessity to survive in a situation of their making. So enabling organisations to invest in their cultural productivity and to invest in their people and to secure long-term stability of contracts is important as we go forward. And the question, who pays for the cultural aspects of our productivity? I think the other thing as well is talking about culture versus how many or how often. I know certainly for us, we're trying to make it more about the journey that we're on in terms of transformation. I think if within our procurement processes, if we remain solely accountable only to the numbers, then we're less likely to get outcomes society needs. And I know that the basic analogy I use sometimes is a car journey. And I think the numbers in the car journey and the numbers of procurement is the emissions. And that happens at the end of the process. And whilst they're important, you need to put in the right fuel, the right emissions out of the back of it. And the journey that we're on at the WISE Group, I think, our focus is really on our people and our culture. And that's what really provides momentum. The fuel that makes the vehicle move, the journey, trust, kindness, resourcing of people. That's akin to kind of servicing your car, if you like, and keeping the vehicle at its optimum. Our watch out is not putting the wrong fuel in the engine. Not overly focusing on numbers. Numbers are a result of what we do. They're not what we do. And I think we need to think about procurement and how that takes cognizance of that. we need the right fuel. It's about purpose, it's about values, it's about culture, it's about well-being. Our value for money needs to be things like that: lower colleague turnover, better colleague well-being, trust in whether colleagues feel empowered to build their own approach in their day, better value outcomes for the service or product, selecting and recruiting new colleagues who are aligned to the purpose and the values of the organisation. And the value for money needs to focus less on how often and how many. And we can link that back to the old-fashioned productivity model, output versus input. The traditional approach never took into account culture, values, and alignment and purpose. We need to ask ourselves, how valuable is that in our delivery and our productivity if we do more things badly based on the wrong values? Working harder doesn't mean culture add that's needed for social impact. Every one of our interactions should be aimed in making a positive impact in people's lives, not just aim to notch up a tally of targets on a board. So let's take a couple of examples, right? A project might stipulate that 20% of our colleagues need to be in the real living wage, and that's great. However, that misses the cultural fit and culture add needed. What about the person? How do we understand that the person's the right fit, has the right skill set? Their development, what behaviours and values they're offering, building and adding to. Other projects might, ask that X number of people are contacted per day, volume metric. Consider that from a change in life perspective. We might consider more fully the impact of that interaction, rather than how many interactions there are, which inevitably leads a person to try and reach that golden number. Targets. If you set a target of 10, you're less likely to get 11, you're most likely to get 8. And in some cases, you'll get someone that might only get to 6, and they'll cut corners to get to 8, leading to lower quality. It's not a numbers game. And then it brings us back to that collaborative advantage versus a collaborative inertia, or we hear it saying, about co-designing or collaborative design. A couple of examples here. We've done the job entry targeted support scheme with Westminster, and that's worked particularly well because it was procured based on what we know what to do best, not what Westminster knows what to do best or the procurer knows what to do best. And our partners in England described what they wanted us to do, but they don't get in the way of telling us how to do it. And I contrast that with some examples in Scotland, Fair Start in particular, actually, and that's much more challenging. They were largely told what to do and how to do it. And that, I believe that's a pure cultural fit, and it's a factor. There's 9 delivery regions for lots in Fair Start, and the procurement didn't look at the cultural fit the partners across the 9 lots. If there's a cultural fit across the lots, then I believe that it would be much more alignment, and there'd be much more value-driven discretionary effort, delivering that extra mile. So, aspiring for social impact is key here. And I think procurement needs to be much more intelligent, emotionally intelligent in that regard to elicit that outcome. So there's definitely a direct link on that. The more we focus on culture and culture fit, and the less on how often and how many, the better outcomes we'll get. Undoubtedly, we need to grow it, we need to nurture it, we need to build it. And finally, I think it's clear that good procurement encourages discretionary effort. If we do that, we'll get better value for money, undoubtedly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Sean. Now it's over to everyone else for your questions. If you can please put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. So let's have a look at them. I see somebody asked if somebody could explain in plain language what public procurement is. I think that's a real challenge for all of us. I've tried and failed to explain public procurement in plain language many times. But if somebody else could do it, then please let me know how to. Okay, so first question we have is around about the National Care Standards consultation, how it will feed into this current consultation. I wondered if, I don't know if Jennifer or Nick, perhaps you might be able to explain about this. Do you know? it's maybe not quite in your remit, but.
Yeah, no, happy to take lead on that. And on public procurement, I would say it's all around fair and open competition. Would be my how do you simplify what public procurement means? It means running fair and open competition. But we have tons of regulation to try and ensure that. But anyway, National Care Service. So obviously, Scottish Government committed to implementing the recommendations. Based on the independent review that was undertaken. The consultation process just closed, didn't it? It was extended, I think, to around the 2nd of November to give more time. I think quite pleased with the level of responses, as well as the number of digital engagement events that took place during the period over the I guess the back end of the summer as well. So really good, strong numbers of people attending and providing those responses. And as I touched on, I think in my little 5 minutes around, procurement's a key part of the recommendations, but also a key part of the thinking going forward. Scottish Government's currently looking at analysing those. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact date of when stuff will be published, but obviously it will be in due course as we start to move back forward on then what as we develop a bill and what then the future state will look like. But I think it's fair to say that engagement, just to finish, engagement, Scottish Government's doing a lot now of internally and working its way through the consultation. But once they've done that, then engagement will probably recommence in earnest.
Great, thanks, Nick. And I see that Hannah Tweed has shared in the chat that she thinks it's early next year for the NCS analysis as well. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions here now. One is for you, Jennifer, just about a bit more details about the name of the Murray project mentioned. I wondered if you could say one or two more things about it.
So the Murray project, this is their housing support piece of work that they were commissioning under the Scotland Excel National contract for care and support. I don't know that it's got a specific name beyond that, but what I can do is tie in with my colleagues and see if there's anything in particular, any write-up or anything that they've got that we could potentially share.
Great, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Now, Sean, I might direct the next couple of questions to you. If you can have a look in the Q&A section, we've got a couple of questions that are quite wordy. So the first one is from Kim. She's keen to hear how voluntary organisations can benefit from collaborative procurement to provide economies of scale for their internal costs. Also asking if they could access, for example, Scottish Government reduced procurement rates to reduce our core costs on products and services. I wondered if Sean, if you would like to give your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll give it a go, Alan. I mean, I think one of the things that the sector struggles with is the concept of collaboration in general. And I know that sounds slightly odd, but partly driven, and an apologies to Nick and his colleagues, but partly driven by the competitive nature that he referenced. Partly driven by that, the need to compete actually sometimes goes against the ability to collaborate, and that in itself is challenging. So personally, I mean, I'll use the England Scotland example again. In England, we secured 16 MOJ contracts, and what we did was we created a special purpose vehicle with another organisation. So we actually created something specifically for that contractual vehicle. Now that's not something I'm aware of happening in Scotland, and I think there's a cultural piece that prevents that from happening. Whereas we're unable to see by the competitive nature of securing funds, and I think that works to our detriment. I can only speak from my own organisation perspective. We're always up for and looking to collaborate with as many people who share the same sort of values as we do as possible. and put forward the most compelling case towards government. The thing that I would ask government to do is not just look at it as a unit cost decision. And that's why I'm saying about the emotionally intelligent piece around about things other than frontline service delivery. You know, and it's interesting that the question related to how do I reduce the costs of bidding? You know, I think there's a real point in that. You know, it's not as inclusive as it could be because it's a costly exercise to bid against a regulated procurement framework that we currently exist within. And again, that's no criticism of Nick or his colleagues, but we have to find a way of making this more accessible and continuing to be fair, but less, I suppose, less destructively competitive. Because there's a normal that'll normalise to the most resourced or strongest in terms of bidding will survive, but the least resourced in terms of bidding, but possibly the most impactful in terms of service delivery will not. And that's not something we should allow to happen. And what was the second one, Alan?
Well, I didn't actually get on to the second one. I wondered, first of all, before we go into the second one, whether Nick or Jennifer wanted to come in. On that, you're both nodding. I'll go to Nick first.
Great, thanks. And I mean, I agree with what Sean's describing there. I mean, there's always, I guess, great procurement work, and unfortunately, the Scottish public procurement sector is a very broad church. Whether that's a local authority, wherever it might be, a small team looking after a local area, or a big group like Scottish Excel or whatever. It's a very broad church across whole Scotland, and therefore you're always going to have buckets of great capability and examples, and somewhere practice isn't good enough. And that's where I talk about, and it's actually one of our public procurement priorities, is how do we drive up a good high standard, good high consistent standard of commercial acumen and commercial judgment and commercial leadership. Because a lot of what Sean's talking about, we can do. It's not the legislation what stops us from being flexible and being innovative and ensuring that we're emphasising on quality, that we're not having a race to the bottom, that we haven't got, that we've got sustainable pricing. All the issues what Sean's kind of quite rightly raising, that we're not evaluating just on numbers or the lowest cost. All of that is within the framework. It's how we apply it in practice and how we ensure that we're engaging with the market. I mean, the competition part and around the fair and openness and the collaboration, we can absolutely collaborate over the full life cycle of the process. What you can't, the areas of collaboration sort of get a little bit less flexible once you're in the procurement process. But what we need to do much more is that early market engagement, working with the supply base before the ITT comes out, giving that upfront notice, using pipelines, working with and bringing in suppliers into helping design. So we're not going out prescriptive specs as Sean mentioned before. And I think this is a real area that around that sort of that collaboration where we can really work together, and some of that comes that that standard and that capability and skills that I touched on.
Thank you, Nick. Just before I go to you, Jennifer, I see Sean, you've got your hand up. Are you wanted to come in directly in response?
Yeah, no, just it's great to hear Nick say that, and I think I'll take him back to something. I took a note of what he said earlier on. As yet, I've not experienced it, but as you said, procurement, or good procurement in our country should build skills, capability, and capacity. And because of the certainly the experience that I have had thus far in this role and other roles, is because of the unit cost focus. You've got no room to build skills, capability, and capacity because it only covers service delivery. So if we're truly, if the organisations that certainly that I share the privilege of working in the third sector with, they don't have the capability from elsewhere to build it. I mean, this is the primary source of support or income, and if there's a limit on. There seems to be some sort of issue about a limit on how much surplus you can generate from an agreement. But only by generating surplus can we reinvest in what we do to give you what you need. And without that ability to reinvest and build skills, capability and capacity, then it's a race to the bottom in terms of quality.
Thank you, Sean. Jennifer?
I think Sean sort of summed up the issue quite well there with the point about the focus on unit cost being a real driver for a lot of, it's a driver for a lot of poor practice. We know that. I think we would be naive to think that we could ever lose that commercial aspect as being a dimension of things that we need to consider. But what we need to do is try to shift the balance so that we're looking at quality is a much more important factor, and price being one amongst many. And if we can get into that space, then I think that should give a bit of comfort for a greater degree of collaboration amongst providers who feel like they're just now competing against this really tight bottom line, and that's driving poor practice. Just in relation to the very specific point that Kim raised, I think, about access, about trying to reduce the cost of bidding. So reducing the cost of bidding is an issue in its own right that we've kind of covered a little bit, but actually practically how we reduce some of that. I mean, I'm aware that organisations like Scottish Care, who don't represent the voluntary sector, but they are a representative body, and they have got an agreement of preferred pricing with a group of providers. So they've come together to do that for suppliers to their own members. But there is also the opportunity for voluntary sector organisations to become members of Scotland Excel, associate members, and to access the contracts that we have that we've agreed for local authorities. So it's on a membership basis, so there's a fee associated with that, and it varies depending on the size of the organisation. But there are options out there for the voluntary sector if they're looking to utilise other pieces of work in terms and try to make economies of scale by tying in with some of the bits and pieces that are out there. So associate membership of Scotland Excel is one option, but I think there's lots, and I think the others are right about our future and trying to collaborate more is about moving away from this real bottom line and the focus on price. I think that would open up a whole, a much wider opportunity for us to do things better.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. Yeah, and very much kind of connected to that, Kim has also posted in the chat, you might have seen something which she says has been driving her crazy for 11 years. So hopefully we can put our mind at rest a wee bit in the 20 minutes that we have left. She says that Scottish Government is the matrix of pre-identified suppliers who provide reduced rates to Scottish Government, local authorities, other public sector providers. She's asking, does it make sense that voluntary organisations have access to this to make their limited resources go further? So this isn't, about bidding for contracts, just about delivering their work in the most economical way. I don't know if Jennifer or Nick, if you want to talk about that at all.
I'm happy to. I'd like to try and solve an 11-year itch if we can. I think I might need to clarify, but I do think a number of our Scottish Government frameworks are accessible for to sector organisations. I think the challenge is private sector organisations, but I think third sector organisation can access a number of our frameworks and therefore benefit from the economies of scale. But what we can do, Alan, is I'll get some finite detail on that, what you could issue out in the note.
That would be really helpful, Nick. Thank you. Okay. Oh, Sean, sorry, you've got your hand up as well. Do you want to
Alan, just one thing before we go on. I think there's something that's quite interesting. I've just picked it up. So in another forum, Kate Forbes, the Finance Secretary, is talking about for Scotland, Scottish Government to get better, it's got to get comfortable with contemplating failure. Right? Now, if you think about one of the things that I believe that we suffer from in procurement at the moment is the transference of risk. Right? And one of the objectives in some cases, and someone's actually said this to me directly, is our job is to transfer the risk to the supply chain. That means we've done our job, right? So we've got a finance secretary saying we need to contemplate failure as a government to get better outcomes and better quality, right? But we potentially have a situation just now where we're transferring risk to the supply chain. Therefore, we're not contemplating failure. We're allowing failure to happen in the supply chain, but not at the procurer level. So I think that there's something for us to take away from that. something for us to take away from that.
Thank you, Sean. Now we'll move on to the next questions from Gary Donegan. He says it's positive to hear points on need for better co-production and co-design of services, and he's asking, is this legacy of the public social partnerships? PSPs, can we expect more PSPs? He's asking, is there a desire to this, or kind of what are the barriers to wider implementation and experimentation in using this highly collaborative approach, future contract design and procurement processes? I wonder, Nick, if you want to answer this one.
Yeah, I mean, Jennifer might have more experience directly of PSPs. I mean, I do think they are quite rare. I mean, generally, based on sharing a level of risk and a level of trust, aren't they? But as Sean sort of mentioned, I'm not sure how much we see them coming through really. But certainly, what we have probably spent more emphasis and more focus on is that collaborating in the service design with the supply base through engagement and market engagement events. But Jennifer might have more examples of PSPs than I do. I think certainly relevant in probably National Care Service, more relevant now. Sorry.
Great, thanks, Nick. Jennifer?
Yes, I agree with Nick. There's not many. there's relatively few examples of PSPs. There's been more, I think, recently in respect of alliance contracting models, and some good feedback in respect of that. But these work in very specific cases, I think, very well. So small markets, areas where you want to work with a group of providers to identify some new and innovative ways to do things. I don't think they work in large areas with hundreds and hundreds of providers and terribly well. So I think yes, we will see more of that type of approach, because the stuff that's coming out of the Feely report and the promise, it's quite clear. It's demanding change. It needs us to do things differently and more innovatively. So I think PSPs and alliance contracting models are likely to form part of that, but I don't think they're the only mechanisms by which we can do things better. I think we can have sort of more typical procurement arrangements, but it's how we approach them, and it's about the areas of focus. It's about not all being about price and about other things, and about co-producing where we can do that and collaborating in appropriate bits and pieces. So I think we will see more of these going forwards, but in some specific areas.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. That's really helpful. Sean?
Yeah, Alan, just on PSPs, and hopefully this helps. I know certainly we've been involved in a PSP with Scottish Government for 7 years now. The WISE Group, which is the New Routes PSP, along with Apex, Sacro, Families Outside, Turning Point, and a number of others. And it's been hugely successful for government and for all the partners involved. And one of the things that I'm always encouraging them to do is look at that model, that already invested in model that delivers the societal impact that they look for in a collaborative, co-designing way, and see where they can apply that model elsewhere. So it's not a new phenomenon. It is there. One part, I think, one of the challenges that we've got, and Nick may recognise this, I'm sure, is that how do we get best practice shared across different parts of government? So that PSP approach is taking place in the Justice Directorate, but there's no reason why it can't take place in the Housing Directorate, Nixon, or the Employability Directorate, or the Care Directorate. So it's working successfully in one part of government, but yet it doesn't seem to get deployed elsewhere. So there is examples of PSPs in existence just now and working very effectively, and have been there for many years.
Thanks very much for that, Sean. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if PSPs do kind of roll out into more sectors. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Now, just to say, you may have noticed in the Q&A section, Kim had asked about if voluntary organisations can access Scottish Government Procurement Matrix, and Gordon Dixon from the Scottish Government very helpfully provided a link to that, saying the Scottish Government National Framework contracts can be accessed by all charities registered in Scotland, and there's no charge for access. So please have a look at that when you can. Yeah, just a note as well from Pauline Gordon at Senscott saying that you know, the Partnership for Procurement support third sector collaboration, but buyers also need to encourage collaborative bids as well. Yeah. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions here, one from Gary Donegan and then one from Margaret Gibb. From Gary, he's asking, has there been any analysis of the impact on organisations that are affected by those contracts where, for example, a single provider is replacing a large network of local grassroots organisations that are perhaps not geared up or best placed to bid for large contracts? For example, how many organisations have closed down, how many staff lost, how many individuals have lost a local service? And then we've also got a question from Margaret Gibb, who asks, wonder how helpful it would be and how open Scottish Government and Scotland Excel might be to having their own capacity to engage with third sector deliverers developed. It would be great from my perspective to see this professional development undertaken to ensure that procurement processes are widely and appropriately informed. So I might go to Jennifer first if you want to answer one or both of them.
So in respect of Gary's point, the contracts certainly that Scotland Excel do are designed in a particular way and are allotted to try to avoid the scenario that he's describing, with one single provider replacing lots of smaller providers. I think 70% of Scotland Excel's providers are small and medium enterprises, so it's quite a significant percentage across the full portfolio, and a large number of them will be, you know, small voluntary providers that work in the social care space. So I'm not sure that we've got sort of analysis of that type, because I don't think that that's part of the issue that we're facing, certainly when we're doing contracts for the local government sector. And I think actually in general in Scotland we're pretty good about designing things that really encourage lots of local participation from small groups of providers rather than big national players. And where we do have big national players on frameworks, they are often accompanied by lots of smaller options. And Margaret's point, I think yes, any engagement with the third sector would be helpful, and we should explore these types of options.
Great, thank you. Nick, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo to what Jennifer says there, and just remind people of some of those headline numbers I think I mentioned at the start. You know, the 7 billion, what goes to Scottish organisations out of that 13 billion, and the 46% goes to SMEs, and that's direct award. So when you compare that to England, or you compare it to the US, or you compare it to Europe, we're leading the pack by far. But you know, those type of impacts that I think Gary describes, you know, the team would absolutely look at as part of the strategy and then part of the any exit arrangement. But I think our results in terms of that small Scottish business involvement in public procurement is pretty strong. I think also, just touching on maybe that last point, I remind people, if they haven't, you know, we Scotland again hosts, which, you know, Scottish Government provide free to all, is the procurement journey to buyers and the supplier journey to suppliers. Fantastic online portal of information, guidance, top tips, how to bid for contracts, how to raise capability, plenty in there, a specific social care section. So just remind, you know, people to utilise that free resource, as well as the supplier development programme, which provides, again, free training, free top tips for people bidding and such forth for contracts.
That's great, Nick and Jennifer. Thank you very much. Right, that's us almost coming to the end, unfortunately, of our webinar. Is there anything, Nick, Sean, or Jennifer, that the burning points that you really wanted to make and you've not been able to make them so far? Is there anything you want to finish on? Nick, you look poised.
Well, from yeah, if you just want to go around, I mean, from my perspective, fantastic. It's great to do this event. You know, hopefully, key messages I think what hopefully have come across from Jennifer and myself, but and then responding, I guess, to Sean's challenges. Absolutely, understand those challenges. We're alive to them. We're listening, and where we can, and where we we take it. We're already taking action in many areas, and we'll continue to do that. And hopefully, that message of collaboration, flexibility, enablement, those type of words have come through what we're trying to do. I do remind you, it's a very broad church. There's some fantastic examples. To your point, Sean, I think that is an area we need to certainly improve. How do we spread case studies? How do we spread good examples? How do we increase comms? Hopefully, people are seeing more comms coming out from Scottish Government's procurement website. If you're not, follow us on Twitter, follow us on LinkedIn. We're putting up some pretty good podcast videos and guidance stuff all the time. So a plug there to follow us. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, first of all, to Nick, Jennifer, and Sean for sharing their insights, and also thanks very much to everybody who attended today for your thoughts in the chat and your questions and for your attendance. I will circulate a short write-up of the meeting soon, and we'll also send around a link to the recording of this, as well as a link to the Blake Stevenson survey, which we mentioned earlier, which closes on December the 21st. Also, Jennifer, if it's okay, can I share your slides with everybody as well, because there was a request for that earlier on. That's perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.